May 1, 1960. Over Sverdlovsk, Soviet Union, 70,000 feet high. The world below was a hazy blue shadow, a perfect curve fading into the darkness of space. At that altitude, the engine noise was nothing but a distant tremor. In the narrow cockpit of the U-2, Francis Gary Powers remained motionless, the pressure suit swollen like a second skin, the helmet sealed, his breathing controlled. The altimeter read 70,500 feet. There were no contrails, no horizon, no movement at all, only the silence of the sky and the silver wings of the Lockheed slicing the atmosphere like a needle. Powers adjusted the oxygen flow and looked at the camera control panel. Each shot from the HICON system captured 12 miles of Soviet territory. Refineries, rail lines, missile complexes, aerodromes, whole cities reduced to tiny grids. He had been flying for more than 3 hours, crossing the heart of the enemy country, farther than any American pilot had ever gone. And beneath him, invisible, an entire empire watched the sky. In the northern radar centers, the screens began to flicker. In Plesetsk, a technician looked up. A faint signal appeared on the monitor, steady, without variation. Impossible altitude, comrade. No aircraft can fly that high. Then what are we seeing? Officers leaned over the green screens. The trace moved slowly, south to north, like a ghost crossing the heavens. Similar reports arrived from Baku, Ashgabat, and Sverdlovsk. All described the same invisible intruder. For years, Soviet air defense had been built on a certainty. The sky of the motherland was impenetrable. But that morning on Labor Day, that certainty began to crack. Meanwhile, in the pressurized cockpit, Powers checked fuel consumption and corrected course. He had already flown over the Aral Sea and the Volga. His next objective, Sverdlovsk, home to military factories and research centers hidden from the outside world. He trimmed the rudder and slowly banked the aircraft. His radio stayed mute. At that height, no transmission could reach him and no fighter could follow. CIA engineers called it the perfect altitude. Too high for airplanes, too low for space. A frontier that belonged to no one. Powers believed it. Everyone did. He looked toward the horizon. The rising sun glinted on the curved edge of the earth. From that height, there were no borders or flags, only colors, shapes, and light. On the ground, MiG-19 squadrons took off from nearby bases. Engines roared, masks sealed. Orders rang with metallic distortion. But the radars repeated the same figure. The target was flying too high. At 70,000 feet, the U-2 was untouchable. "Comrade Colonel," a pilot reported, "we cannot climb any higher. The air runs out before we reach him." "Then what are we seeing?" the colonel repeated softly. Only the electric hum and the tick-tock of the wall clock could be heard. Up there, Powers leveled the wings. Another camera cycle began. Each image recorded what no human eye had seen. The very heart of the Soviet Union, revealed in perfect detail from the edge of space. He did not know that beneath his wings, Soviet radars had already called Moscow. He did not know that new weapons, invisible to American intelligence, were being readied in secret. Soviet pilots had laughed at the American spy plane, convinced that no craft could fly so high. But that day, over Sverdlovsk, the U-2 was already looking straight into the soul of their empire. Historical background. The end of the Second World War did not bring peace. It brought silence, a tense silence split by new borders and by a distrust deeper than any ocean. On one side, the United States emerged as an undefeated power, backed by industrial wealth and a nuclear monopoly. On the other, the Soviet Union, devastated but resolved never again to be invaded. What began as alliance turned into suspicion, and suspicion soon became fear. Thus, the Cold War was born, a war without open battles where the chief weapon was information. By the mid-1950s, that fear reached a new pitch. Washington feared the Soviet Union was building bombers and missiles at a pace that outstripped any Western estimate. Strategists spoke of the bomber gap and the missile gap. Every rumor, every military parade in Red Square was analyzed as if it hid the truth of an invisible threat. But there was a problem. The United States was blind. Beyond the Iron Curtain, There were no recent photographs, no reliable maps, no direct sources. No aircraft had successfully crossed Soviet airspace since the end of the war. Satellites were still a dream. Everything they knew came from rumors, infiltrated spies, or observations from the border. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union was invisible. Behind its wall of secrecy, the Kremlin hid its factories, missile launchers, airfields, and nuclear laboratories. No one in the West could confirm what truly lay behind those closed borders. For American intelligence, it was like watching a storm from the outside. You saw the lightning, but not the origin of the thunder. Before the U-2, attempts to obtain information were desperate. RB-45 and B-47 aircraft had tried high-altitude reconnaissance incursions, but they were slow, heavy, and vulnerable. Some made it back, others vanished from radar and never returned. There were also experiments with spy balloons launched from Europe and Turkey. Many were shot down, others drifted across the Siberian sky and were lost over the ocean. None brought answers. By late 1953, the world seemed frozen in a balance of fear. Stalin had died that same year, leaving behind a country ruled by shadows and suspicion. His successor, Nikita Khrushchev, soon turned that inheritance into a new kind of pride, the pride of industry, rockets, and steel. While the United States trusted in its economic power, the Soviet Union trusted in its silence. Both powers knew that open war would mean the end of the world, but each believed the other was preparing to start it. And in that reciprocal paranoia, the sky became the most coveted territory. The United States needed eyes that could look beyond the Iron Curtain, pierce the fog of secrecy, and reveal the truth. Eyes that no missile could reach, nor any airplane intercept. And so, while Soviet radars scanned the horizon for enemies that did not yet exist, on a desert base in California, something began to be built that would change the balance of the world forever. Washington needed eyes that could see beyond the Iron Curtain, from a place where no missile could reach them. The birth of Project Aquatone. In 1954, President Dwight D. Eisenhower faced a dilemma he could not solve with armies or speeches. He needed to know what the Soviet Union was building. Satellites did not yet exist, and conventional air missions carried too high a political risk. Without proof, Pentagon planners were operating amid conjecture. Every rumor about Soviet bombers was treated as an imminent threat. That year, the Central Intelligence Agency proposed a solution so improbable it seemed lifted from science fiction. An aircraft that could fly higher than any other, fast enough to escape any interceptor, and light enough to reach the edge of space. A plane that could look down and photograph the enemy's heart with the clarity of a microscope. Eisenhower approved the project in secret. They called it Aquatone, an anodyne name to hide the decade's largest technological espionage operation. The contract went to a small division of Lockheed Aircraft known for its isolation and audacity, the Skunk Works in Burbank, California. The man in charge was Clarence Kelly Johnson, an engineer who did not believe in limits. Johnson had designed the P-38 Lightning and the jet F-104 Starfighter. But what he was now asked to do was unlike anything before. He was not to create a fighter or a bomber, but something entirely new. A machine that could float in air at 21,000 meters where the sky darkened and oxygen all but vanished. To achieve it, the aircraft had to be extraordinarily light. Every screw, every cable, every drop of fuel was calculated with obsessive precision. Johnson ordered wings so thin and long that no military aircraft had ever had them. They would be fragile, but they would allow flight in the thinnest air on the planet. "We'll make it as slender as a dragonfly's wing," Johnson said one night, sketching the silhouette on paper. "And visible to no one," a CIA agent beside him replied. The project advanced in absolute secrecy. Engineers worked under constant watch, not fully knowing for whom they were building. Parts were fabricated in scattered shops and brought together only at the last moment. Every component bore a different serial number. No label mentioned the word espionage. The engine was another challenge. Conventional jets lost power at high altitude, so Johnson and his team turned to a single spool engine, modified from tactical fighters, but tuned to work where air nearly disappeared. Every test was run at night, every flight outside civil radar. In official documents, Project Aquatone did not exist. Records spoke of meteorological studies and atmospheric research aircraft. Pilots were civilian contractors, not military. If something went wrong, the government could deny any link to them. For testing, they sought a place remote enough that no one would find it. In the Nevada desert, in a dry valley ringed by mountains, the engineers set up a small metal hangar by an improvised strip. They simply called it Groom Lake. There, under the desert's relentless sun, the first prototype was assembled piece by piece. The fuselage was so narrow the pilot had to enter like a diver into a tube. It had no armament, no armor, no defense systems, only a gigantic camera that took up almost the entire front of the plane. During the first trials, the craft rose slowly, as if the air refused to hold it. But when it reached cruising altitude, everything changed. Radar vanished, the sky turned black, and the plane, so fragile in appearance, became untouchable. In 1955, in a dusty hangar in the Nevada desert, a shape lifted off the ground that should not have existed. A spy plane, able to see the curvature of the Earth. The Lockheed U-2 had been born, and with it, a new way to look at the world. The first tests and discoveries. The first U-2 took off from Groom Lake in the summer of 1955. It was a clear, dry morning, with no witnesses beyond a handful of engineers and CIA officers. The plane climbed awkwardly at first, wrestling the desert's hot air, but when it reached 20,000 meters, the world below became unrecognizable. At that height, the sky was no longer blue, it was black. The sun blazed with no atmosphere to soften it, and the horizon showed a curve only astronauts had imagined. The test pilot, Tony Levier, described the experience as flying at the edge of time. There was no sound, no wind, no sense of speed, only the solitude of space and the certainty of being somewhere no human should be. Trials in Nevada and New Mexico proved the aircraft was stable, but the human body was not. Pilots suffered dizziness, disorientation, nausea, and crushing chest pressure. The pressure suits, adapted from high-altitude models, inflated like rigid armor. Every movement required force. Every mistake could mean a slow death by decompression. The plane, however, delivered on its promise. Its Hicon B cameras could capture unimaginable detail, a resolution of barely 75 centimeters per pixel. From more than 20 kilometers up, a single frame revealed truck license plates, antenna shadows, tire tracks in the EP. Dirt. It was a godlike gaze upon the enemy. The first reconnaissance missions were carried out over Allied territory, testing flight stability and image quality. Then, in early 1956, the flights crossed the Baltic. The U-2 overflew Poland, East Germany, and the Caucasus borders. No Soviet radar managed to detect it. No fighter got close. The photographs that returned to Washington transformed the perception of the war. Where there had been conjecture, there was now evidence. The supposed bomber army's intelligence reports described as an immediate threat did not exist. Soviet intercontinental missiles were few, experimental, and many not even operational. The dreaded bomber gap was a myth, the missile gap as well. The images revealed a powerful country, yes, but still far from the industrial capacity its propaganda proclaimed. The hangars were fewer, the runways shorter, the arsenals smaller than imagined. In photographs of the May 1st parades, the CIA discovered something telling. The same aircraft circled over Moscow, passing several times before Western cameras to feign a larger fleet. When Eisenhower saw the first classified images, he understood the risk had been worth it. For the first time since the war's end, the United States knew exactly what it faced. Not rumors, not speeches, photographs. Each U-2 flight rewrote the map of Soviet power. Each photograph rewrote American fear. The president ordered the missions to continue. The pilots would be civilians, the flights unofficial, and the targets ever deeper in enemy territory. What had begun as a technical gamble became the century's most ambitious espionage operation. As the U-2 kept rising over the world, Washington learned to view the planet in a new way, not from borders, but from the sky. And from there, everything seemed clearer and more fragile. Soviet pride and mockery. By mid-1956, Soviet radars began recording faint signals high in the sky. Echoes so high, so steady that technicians thought they were calibration errors. In official reports, the readings were logged as atmospheric anomalies. No one imagined those motionless dots on the screens were foreign aircraft crossing Soviet airspace with impunity. In air defense barracks, pilots joked among themselves. "The Americans think they can touch the stratosphere," one said, laughing as he watched the radar. "Let them keep dreaming." Soviet confidence rested on numbers. The most modern fighters in their arsenal, the MiG-17 and MiG-19, could climb to 45,000 or 50,000 feet before the air grew too thin. Beyond that height, engines choked, controls lost effectiveness, and pilots felt the sky closing in on them. No aircraft had flown stably above that barrier. For them, the edge of the atmosphere was an invisible, unbreakable wall. Soviet defense trusted that ceiling as if it were a natural law. Radars were designed to detect targets within those bounds. Anti-aircraft batteries, missiles, even early warning protocols started from the same certainty. The enemy could only come so far. That is why, when rumors began about invisible planes crossing the Urals or the Caucasus, no one took them seriously. Commanders blamed the reports on instrument failures, meteor reflections, or even American weather experiments. High officials at the Ministry of Defense laughed at the first complaints from regional units. "The Americans are measuring clouds, not territories," a general said with disdain. "Let them measure whatever they want." During the May 1st parades, speeches in Red Square proclaimed Soviet technological supremacy. Newspapers spoke of new radars, infallible anti-aircraft rockets, and pilots patrolling the sky 24 hours a day. To the world's eyes, the air over the Soviet Union was the most protected on the planet. But the reality was different. While Soviet propaganda filled newsreels with images of missiles and flags, U-2s overflew those same cities from heights no fighter could reach. They photographed Moscow, Leningrad, Arctic bases, and missile sites in the Urals, all without being caught. Radars recorded faint echoes that disappeared before they could be tracked. No one knew where they came from or where they went. With each American flight, Soviet arrogance grew, not its caution. In their pride, they deemed it impossible that anyone was watching from above, and that incredulity became their greatest vulnerability. For them, the sky had a ceiling. The Americans were about to prove it did not. The escalation of espionage. Between 1956 and 1959, U-2 missions grew bolder, longer, and more dangerous. What had begun as cautious flights along the edges of the Soviet bloc turned into deep incursions over its territory. American pilots photographed Leningrad, Moscow, Vladivostok, and Arzamas-16, the secret city where Soviet scientists developed nuclear weapons. Each flight was a provocation, each image an affront. And yet none of those planes was shot down. Soviet radars could already follow the U-2's path in part, but only as erratic lines appearing and disappearing on the screen. Tracking stations managed to predict its route, but never to reach it. Interceptors leapt into the air but hung suspended kilometers below, powerless against an enemy flying beyond the reach of known physics. In the Kremlin, Nikita Khrushchev soon learned of the incursions. Reports arrived with a mix of shame and anger. The Americans were overflying the heart of the Soviet motherland, taking photographs of military installations, factories, and command centers. For a leader who rooted his power in an image of invulnerability, it was an intolerable insult. Khrushchev reacted with fury. He summoned his military chiefs and demanded an immediate answer. The order was clear: develop a weapon that can reach the sky. From that demand was born the S-75 Dvina, known to NATO as the SA-2 guideline, a surface-to-air missile guided by radar and capable of climbing higher than any existing fighter. Soviet engineers worked in secret, building mobile launchers and warheads designed to destroy targets at more than 20 kilometers of altitude. By mid-1959, the first batteries were ready for trials. But while the Soviets built missiles, in Washington, the CIA convinced itself of the opposite, that the U-2 was untouchable. Eisenhower himself hesitated, fearing a failed mission might ignite a diplomatic crisis. But analysts insisted no radar could guide a projectile to that altitude. They believed altitude was a shield. They believed physics was on their side. During those years, flights multiplied. Some took off from Pakistan and Turkey with British support. Others operated from Norway and West Germany under joint CIA and RAF control. Secret cooperation between London and Washington reached unprecedented levels. In British reports, the U-2 was described as the eye of the free sky. But the higher the plane climbed, the thinner the line became between peace and war. Each flight violated Soviet airspace, and each radar that detected it became a potential spark. In the offices of Moscow and Washington, both sides knew a mistake could trigger what no one wanted to name: the Third World War. The Americans remained convinced the enemy could not reach them, the Soviets, that it was only a matter of time. The sky, invisible and silent, had become the new front of the Cold War. The turning point, May of 1960. On May 1st, 1960, before dawn, a plane lifted off in silence from a military base in Peshawar, Pakistan. It was a routine mission, or so it seemed. Its code name was Operation Grand Slam, and its destination, the very heart of the Soviet Union. At the controls was Francis Gary Powers, a former Air Force pilot and now a CIA contractor. The route was carefully plotted. From Peshawar, he would cross the Caspian Sea, overfly Baku, head toward Sverdlovsk, turn north toward Murmansk, and end his flight in Norway. A run of almost 7,000 kilometers that, if all went well, would reveal the exact position of Soviet missile factories and launch fields. At 6:30 in the morning, Soviet radars began to pick up the intrusion. The echo was faint, barely perceptible, but it held steady, moving slowly north. The operator at the Plesetsk station reported to headquarters: an unknown target, constant speed, impossible altitude. The message reached Moscow within minutes. Nikita Khrushchev was awakened and brought to the command center. He listened to the full report without raising his voice. Then he gave a single order: "Bring it down." From several bases, interceptor squadrons took off. The MiGs climbed to where the air began to unravel, but the intruder was still higher, a distant shadow moving slowly over the Urals. When it became clear no fighter could reach it, the commander at Plesetsk authorized the launch of the new S-75 Dvina missiles, newly added to air defense. In the U-2's cockpit, Powers checked his instruments. The sun flashed on the windshield like a white sheet. At that altitude, the plane seemed suspended in the void. He did not know dozens of radars were tracking him. He did not know a missile, guided by radar waves, was climbing toward him at more than 3 times the speed of sound. Operators watched the dot on the screen close in on the target. The first missed, the second as well. The third hit. At 70,500 feet, the sky lit up. The missile exploded near the fuselage, tearing off one wing and sending the plane into a spiral toward the ground. In the cockpit, Powers felt the U-2 split in two. Oxygen rushed into the void. Instruments went dark. He fired the ejection seat and was hurled into space, wrapped in the absolute silence of the stratosphere. For a few seconds, he floated. Then, the fall began. Air returned like a blow, the parachute opened, and sound came back to the world. Below, the fields of Sverdlovsk rushed up to meet him. On the ground, peasants and soldiers ran toward the landing point. Powers was captured within minutes. They dragged him out of the canopy, ringed him with rifles, and while they aimed at him, one Soviet officer bent down and said, "You should not be here." Powers, exhausted, barely replied, "Neither should you." The plane had been destroyed, its wreckage scattered over several kilometers. But the Soviets recovered enough to prove that the craft was no innocent weather ship, but a flying camera loaded with espionage gear. In the days that followed, Moscow celebrated its victory with contained pride. The enemy had been reached at his highest point. The myth of American invulnerability had disintegrated at 70,000 feet. The diplomatic consequences. The news raced around the world like an electric jolt. On May 1st, 1960, the Soviets had shot down an unidentified aircraft over their territory. For the first hours, Washington remained silent. Official communiques spoke of an American meteorological plane lost during an atmospheric research mission. An accident. Nothing more. But Moscow did not take long to answer. 5 days later, Nikita Khrushchev appeared before the Supreme Soviet with a restrained smile. He showed photographs of the wreckage, the camera gear, and the espionage equipment. Then, with calculated theatrics, he revealed the final blow. Pilot Francis Gary Powers was alive and in Soviet custody. The hall burst into applause. The entire world understood what it meant. The United States had lied. For weeks, the White House had stuck to the story of the scientific plane. But before irrefutable evidence, Eisenhower was forced to admit what everyone suspected. The U-2 was a spy plane operated by the CIA, and it had been overflying the Soviet Union for years. Humiliation was immediate. In a single stroke, the nation that had prided itself on morality and transparency was laid bare. The Paris summit, scheduled for mid-May and meant to bring together the United States, the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, and France, turned into a diplomatic ruin. Khrushchev arrived with photographs of Powers in hand, ready to destroy what little trust remained among leaders. Eisenhower tried to soften the damage, declaring the missions had been necessary to preserve the security of the free world. But words did not suffice. Khrushchev left the conference and announced the indefinite suspension of all negotiations. The Cold War had just entered its most dangerous phase. The plane had flown higher than any other in history and had brought diplomacy to its lowest point. The consequences were immediate. U-2 flights over Soviet territory were permanently suspended. Secret bases in Turkey and Pakistan were closed. Pilots were reassigned or silenced. In Langley, the CIA understood the sky was no longer safe, but the need to see beyond the Iron Curtain remained the same. If the enemy could shoot down a plane, then the answer could not lie in the atmosphere, but higher still. Thus began a new project, more ambitious, farther from all human risk. The Corona program, the first generation of spy satellites. The U-2 had watched from the stratosphere. Its successor would look down from space. The impact on the Cold War. The downing of the U-2 did not merely change the course of a mission, it changed the course of the century. Until that day, the sky had been a stage for presumption and dominance, a territory the United States considered its own by technological right. But the Soviet missile that struck Powers' plane proved something deeper, that no altitude guaranteed safety. That air superiority no longer depended on flying higher, but on flying differently. In the months after the incident, the global balance was reshaped. The Soviet Union, proud of its victory, poured vast resources into strengthening its air defense network. Hundreds of S-75 Divina batteries were deployed across the country, forming an invisible wall against any future incursion. The lesson was clear. The enemy could come from the sky and had to be stopped before touching it. In the United States, the response was different. If altitude was no longer a shield, then the future lay in invisibility. Lockheed engineers, under the same Kelly Johnson, began new secret projects. The A-12 Oxcart, designed to fly faster than sound and higher than the U-2, and its successor, the legendary SR-71 Blackbird. It was the birth of the age of stealth, black titanium aircraft invisible to radar, able to cross continents in minutes. Machines created not only to see, but not to be seen. But the most lasting lesson of the U-2 was not measured in speed or altitude. It was measured in information. The diplomatic humiliation of 1960 pushed the CIA and the Air Force to look beyond the atmosphere. In 1962, the Corona project placed the first spy satellites in orbit. Their cameras, suspended in the void, could photograph the entire Earth without any nation claiming a violation of sovereignty. It was a new form of surveillance, constant and silent. At the same time, the space race accelerated. Sputnik, launched 3 years earlier, had been the warning. Vostok and Mercury, the manned programs of Soviets and Americans, became the public stage of a competition that was in truth technological and military. Every rocket, every satellite, every transmission from space was a message. Whoever sees more dominates more. From war came observation, from fear, science. The sky ceased to be a battlefield. It became a frontier. The U-2 incident marked the end of one era and the beginning of another. After it, no flight over the Earth was ever innocent again. Every signal, every radar, every shadow in the stratosphere became part of the game. And humanity, for the first time, began to grasp that power no longer resided in force, but in the gaze. Over the skies of Sverdlovsk, the air is still thin and dark blue. At 70,000 feet, where sound dissolves and the horizon curves, the world seems small, almost motionless. There, at that boundary between Earth and the void, Francis Gary Powers saw more than the geography of an enemy. He saw the very shape of history. Because that day, in 1960, the plane born in secrecy, built with wings as thin as a dragonfly's, changed forever the way nations watched one another. The U-2 proved no border was high enough, no wall broad enough to hide a country from the eye of technology. The Soviets had laughed at the fragile American spy plane, believing it nothing more than an experiment doomed to fall. But before its fall, the U-2 had already photographed the heart of their empire. It had already revealed what propaganda had tried to conceal. And in that silent act, it had proved an uncomfortable truth. No wall could reach the sky. Decades later, the U-2 still flies, redesigned, updated, turned into a surveillance platform that still cruises the same heights that made it legend. Neither satellites, nor drones, nor spacecraft have fully replaced its steady, patient gaze from the stratosphere. The plane that once sparked a global scandal became, in time, a symbol of human persistence to see beyond limits. At 70,000 feet, Francis Gary Powers saw the curvature of the Earth and the curvature of history. In the Cold War, victory did not belong to those who shouted the loudest, but to those who could see the farthest.